Hello and welcome to the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast. My name is Tom Luongo and we have a lot to talk about. It is episode 40 and the CHAZ has been chopped down to size. So the CHAZ, nay CHOP, in downtown Seattle should end this week as Mayor Jenny Durkan bows to reality that it's a lawless zone with no chance of remaining peaceful. But at the same time, from my perspective, it looks like it served its purpose. So I'm going to explain why this is. But first, I want to remind you that you can follow me over my work over at my blog at tomluongo.me. You can follow me on Twitter at TFL1728. Live streams, they happen every Monday night at 8 p.m. and every Friday night at 8:30 p.m. EST on YouTube. Warning, I'm a bad boy. I've got a potty mouth, and I use those words in sentences. You can also support the podcast by downloading and installing the Brave browser. Now, Brave protects your online privacy by blocking all those pesky data snoopers, ads, and tracking cookies which feed the growing surveillance state. Moreover, you can earn crypto tokens called BAT for opting into Brave's ad network and use those earnings to tip your favorite content creators who, like me, are verified publishers on the network. Be it your favorite website, YouTube, Twitch, or SoundCloud channel, click the Brave logo icon to the right of your search bar to tip your earnings and directly support the content you love. They are like YouTube Super Chats, but without Google taking the 30% cut. Lastly, you can join more than 400 people who support me directly on Patreon at patreon.com/Gold, Goats, and Guns, where you can sign up for the twice-weekly market reports covering current events and the technical state of important markets like the dollar, gold, Bitcoin, and others. And lastly, you can sign up for the Gold, Goats, and Guns monthly newsletter, which ties up all the cultural, geopolitical, and economic shifts and trends into a coherent portfolio strategy designed to help you make sense of a world going mad. All right, we're here in the United States, and the Civil War continues. I've talked about this in the last couple of podcasts. We're going to talk about it again today. I've named it the Black Revolution. I think it's pretty obvious that that's the color of this color revolution that has been fomented here in the United States. And color revolutions go through a variety of stages to get them to the point where they could possibly affect regime change. We've had the early stages of that. Aside from the decades worth of work to undermine the institutions of culture here in the United States, and the long-term plan, starting with Comintern back in the 30s and moving its way forward through the institutions of culture and the now completely rotten educational establishment, we're at that moment where those multiple generations of children brought up in these systems are now ready to be radicalized for cultural Marxism. It's where we are. There's no way to argue it. And it's getting its full flower now in Seattle and in Democratic strongholds around the country, but especially in the Pacific Northwest, in places like Portland and Seattle, with the creation of the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone known as the CHAZ, which renamed itself to the CHOP, which we talked about last week, and the reasons why they did that, having to do with to continue to get government support for their little operation there. The mayor, Jenny Durkan, directly supports the CHAZ as some kind of summer of love experiment, but it's quickly turned into, because the truth of the matter is there's no cops there. Untrained people running around with guns. We're seeing like slave trains of white people in chains being led around by black people. We're seeing autonomous zones within the CHAZ, places where whites are protecting the black safe space areas within this, what's supposed to be a free and open area. It's a very strange thing to watch communists turn into corporatists, isn't it? Well, whatever. I'm not surprised at all. These people aren't anarchists. They are absolutely the worst kind of authoritarians. And they're willing to enforce their law at the point of a gun. This CHAZ experiment could have actually been something interesting had it not become so unutterably predictable. Because there were shootings this weekend, and those have forced Durkan's hand, because it's very obvious now that the people of Seattle are not going to support this much longer. The stealing of private property, the hijacking of a 6-block zone in the middle of the city, and still have to pay taxes to support all this. As I went over last week, things like the water shouldn't be running unless they're paying for it. The electricity shouldn't be turned on. They shouldn't be cleaning the porta potties, or in the case of the shootings, providing emergency services and or police support. Because, no, the whole purpose of the CHAZ was to provide a provocation to goad President Trump into violent action, invoking the Insurrection Act of 1878, and that has failed. It failed in Minneapolis. It failed here in Seattle, and though I'm sure that Trump wanted to do something like this because he loves to look tough, beat up on weak opponents, but at the same time, that's the wrong way of going about this, because you don't bring the almighty U.S. military in to roust a bunch of chalk-armed soy boys. It just doesn't play well. And so politically, he had to realize that the best way to handle this was to govern the way he's governed for the most part, as a federalist. Offer support, offer the federal government's help, but if the state refuses that help, well, okay, this is your problem then. I guess you're going to take care of it. And if you don't take care of it, well, that's for your voters and your constituents to deal with, because at the end of the day, it's not the federal government's job to police what's happening inside the city of Seattle. That's the city of Seattle government's job, or the state of Washington's, depending on the separation of powers within Washington state law, which I know nothing about. But Durkin is now going to break up the CHAZ, or at least that's what she says she's going to do. And when she does so, she will be canceled. Remember, she allowed this to happen because after ceding the East Precinct to these people, the next day they showed up in City Hall demanding she be removed from office because she wasn't sufficiently supportive and sufficiently woke enough. So the knives are going to come out. There's no appeasing these people. They have an unquenchable envy for that which they don't have, and they want to destroy it. I keep reminding you about the scene in Fight Club where Ed Norton beats the crap out of Jared Leto and is asked by Tyler Durden, his imaginary friend, what was that all about? I just wanted to destroy something beautiful. That's who these people are at their core. They want to destroy beautiful things that they can't have. But what this is now creating is the opportunity for violence with the Seattle Police Department when the Seattle Police Department moves in to break up the CHAZ. And this will be used as recruiting material for Antifa. Tim Pool's did a great job of going over all this stuff about how Antifa operates. In the police's breaking up of the CHAZ, there will be people who were not rioters, who were not looters, who were not shooting anybody, and who were peaceful. And they're going to get whacked over the heads with nightsticks, and they're going to get prodded, and they're going to get maced, and they're going to get tear gassed, and all the rest of it. And that's only going to be fodder, fertile ground to radicalize more people into Antifa's ranks. But because Trump didn't do anything here, the regime change portion of this operation has failed completely. Now it'll just further radicalize kids in Seattle to become members of Antifa. Maybe they'll be bused across the country to protest against Trump over in D.C. when these things come to D.C. But as far as I can analyze here, the mayor of Seattle is going to be the one that takes the hit, and this is a loss in the long run if Trump stays out of it completely for the people behind all this, the Davos crowd, the deep state, whoever you want to attribute to what's happening here. That's your prerogative. In an article that was published yesterday at Strategic Culture Foundation, which, by the way, I wrote last Wednesday right after the CHAZ kind of got turned into the CHOP and all of this stuff. It took about 5 days for that to go through editorial for a variety of reasons. So the article is a little dated by the time it came out. I asked whether or not the CHAZ would become the next version of the Maidan. It looks like I'm going to be wrong on that point, and that's perfectly reasonable. This was ultimately then a fact-finding mission as opposed to a potential uprising, a potential catalyst for something bigger. But that's fine, because the potential is still there. The kind of radicalization that's going to take place, because there will be violence between the police and the people in the CHAZ when it's broken up, will be a smaller version of what happened on the Maidan in Ukraine in 2014. This is a test run for what comes next. What happened in Ukraine in 2014 was the protests on the Maidan eventually led to the ouster of President Viktor Yanukovych, right? So the setup is here. The setup was very clear as to what they were working towards with this little experiment, and it's failed. Note something else about this. Portland, they tried the same thing, and the police immediately shut it down. There was no violence. Just as these kids were setting up the barricades, the police were just walking up and taking the barricades away. They didn't have direct political support in Portland. They didn't have direct political support last night in D.C. when they tried to do the same thing surrounding the Andrew Jackson statue outside the White House, right? They wanted to create the Black Hill Autonomous Zone and even spray painted BHAZ on one of the monuments. But without direct local political support, these autonomous zones cannot exist for any length of time because the police won't stand for it. So now we have so that's one aspect of this. That's one kind of tactics in the overall color revolution strategic playbook. Another one is the complete and utter demoralization of the police. Atlanta is now our best example of that. So Atlanta is being sacrificed through police demoralization. Right after last week's podcast, what did we see? The district attorney came down with a felony murder charge against the cop that shot and killed Rayshard Brooks, which is a clear overcharge. Okay? So the next thing to do for the police under the circumstance is to walk out. They're not getting support from the local establishment. The local political power structure threw them to the wolves, and they just decided not to show up for work, which, again, plays into the strategy because now Atlanta is not policed. Again, another attempt to get Trump to come in with the military and restore order in a place where there's been chaos fomented with the help of the local government. So you've got local governments run by Democrats. Bill de Blasio was doing the same thing in New York. He disbanded the plainclothes cops division, and crime is up 300% in New York, as he further hamstrings the NYPD from doing their job. The police union is angry as all get out. The police officers are angry as all get out. They're not going to show up and do their job, and they're just going to put in their time and let everybody, shoot each other because they don't care, because they're not going to get themselves involved in this, and they shouldn't. This is on the politicians, and the chaos has to be put back on the politicians who are taking a knee and bowing to the mob. The politicians are going to be spineless. They're the ones that have to be held accountable for their spinelessness. They're supposed to lead. They're supposed to be our elected leaders, and they're not doing it. But people like de Blasio and Jenny Durkin and Jay Inslee and all the rest of them, they're all doing this on purpose. This is all part of the strategy. We had over 100 shootings in Chicago over the weekend. 26 or 28 people died. And yet there's the mayor begging Walmart not to leave, Target not to leave after their stores were looted. Like, are you crazy? And then the last tactic in all of this is to keep people angry and on edge because they're now ramping up the doom porn about a second wave of COVID-19. That won't go away. And I remind everybody, the cases reported don't matter. Only deaths and hospitalizations matter. But they're trying to keep us on edge, and they're trying to keep us at odds with each other. They're trying to keep the companies from denying you service for not wearing a mask, which, by the way, is, from what I understand, I was on one radio network this morning, and a guy called in from Seattle, told us, look, according to OSHA law, they can't actually do that. All you have to do is say, I have a medical condition. My medical condition is I want to remain healthy, so I'm not wearing a mask, and keep going. And go about your business, and they can't stop you from going into the store. So anybody wearing a mask in the store is doing so out of peer pressure, not out of legal requirement. And I can tell you that I went into a Guitar Center in Gainesville, and they had this whole thing set up to require masks and limit the number of people in the store and the whole 9 yards. And I was standing in line, and I was fully expecting to be told, you have to wear a mask to get in the store, and it didn't happen. It was my turn to go in the store. They just waved me inside, and I did my business, and that was that. And I was the only person in the store without a mask, and everybody was kind of looking at me, and I'm like, hi, how you doing? Being nice to everybody, just actually being nicer than normal. I think I mentioned this in a couple of podcasts ago that, I've actually been more pleasant in public than I normally am at this point in time, because it's incredibly galling for the people who are wearing masks and looking at you sideways, and they're like, hi, how are you? How you been? What's going on? Gotta. Just being nicer than I normally am, because usually in public, I'm just a curmudgeon. I'm like, I want my thing. I want to get in and get out. I don't care. Please don't waste my time. But now I'm overly nice. It's kind of cool. It's kind of fun. All right. But back to the subject at hand. All of these things, COVID-19, the autonomous zones, demoralization of the police. All of these things are in service of trying to foment a color revolution at the same time. Because what is this doing? It's destroying economic activity. It's retarding any attempt to get out from underneath the demand destruction within the economy. They're trying to keep people on the verge of desperation and anxiety and all the rest of it. They're trying to keep people on edge and keep them angry and not allow them any respite from this, so that their frustration just boils over randomly and maybe they'll stop supporting President Trump. This is the goal. And if you want a color revolution to succeed, you have to make the people economically desperate. You have to destroy and weaken the bonds of community between people. So, of course, forcing people to stand 6 feet away from each other so they can't actually talk, have them talk behind masks so we can't hear each other, delineate who the good people are, who are virtue signaling that they're good community members, from the bad people who aren't wearing masks. The whole thing is a big image system to destroy the economy and destroy and weaken the social bonds between people. It's absolutely what's happening here. And if you are unwilling to accept that analysis, tell you that you are terminally naive and willfully being obtuse. Period. This is where I draw the line and say I will not stand for any other interpretation of this at this point in time. The stakes are now way too big. We're dealing with civil war and open insurrection. Okay? So this is part of the reason why I bought a bunch of guns over the weekend. And I'm not kidding. So ultimately, where does this lead? What's the end game here? Well, the end game obviously is to get rid of Donald Trump by any number of different ways, because all of these things feed into different potential outcomes. Ultimately, D.C. is the next target. And they tried last night, which would be Monday the 22nd, by trying to pull down the Andrew Jackson statue outside the White House. Now, the police pushed everybody back, but for a moment, they declared themselves the Black Hill Autonomous Zone. Trump is pushed back, now threatening 10 years in prison for defaming statues and flags. It's a useless political gesture. It's good chum for his base, but it doesn't really do anything. And again, last night in D.C., another example that if they don't have local political support, they can't create these autonomous zones. July 4th, in my mind, is the likely next big date. I cannot believe that a Bolshevik jackass like Barack Obama is going to pass up the opportunity to declare Black Independence Day on July 4th. Let's think about what's going to happen on July 4th in D.C. There's going to be thousands of patriots there to celebrate the country's independence, right? The birth of the country. There's going to be fireworks, as there always are. There's going to be a big celebration, right? They're going to march on D.C. They're going to attempt to draw Trump into a direct conflict. The symbolism is just too rich to pass up. Patriots and Antifa in close proximity to each other, Charlottesville 2.0. Now, in the country, there's no support for what these people are doing. And so you have to change the narrative. You've got to get normie space in America to change their tune. You've got to get Scott Adams to go, okay, Trump overstepped his bounds here. So something terrible has to happen for the media to be able to beat into us just how terrible that thing was, so they can take whatever the incident is and try and blow it out of proportion. NPR was caught red-handed the other day trying to stage an incident and blame it on alt-right white nationalists. It's ridiculous. But this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with people who are trying to create reality that we respond to. Twitter's not real life. I remind you every week, Twitter is not real life. So, reminder, I'm gonna take you back in time for the setup here, because with the setup for DC on July 4th, or at any point in the future, depending on how things shake out with the election, are going to turn into something very similar to what happened on the Maidan Plaza in Kiev, in Ukraine in 2014. They had a couple of months' worth of peaceful protest. Victoria Nuland, the Assistant Secretary of State, and John McCain were out there with cookies, supporting the protesters. They had recently done photo ops with Right Sector. Right Sector are a bunch of Stephen Bandera following Ukrainian Nazis, literal Ukrainian Nazis, who were of the tip of the violent spear for the potential revolution in Kiev that we were actively courting. So here it's the communists And the anti-fascist over there is the actual literal fascist. It doesn't matter. Whoever the useful idiots are, we're going to use them for our own purposes and then turn them into useless eaters later on and sacrifice them. President Yanukovych, to his credit, refused to break up the protests or bring and activate the police. He should have broken up the protests early, before they got started, before they got big and out of control. Putin warned him about this. Putin's talked about this directly, and you can watch the movie called Crimea: The Way Home. He talks about what led up to the Maidan and Yanukovych's mistakes that led to the Maidan. He refused to break them up or activate the police in any way other than to do crowd control. Things were tense, but they weren't violent. Eventually, there was a catalyst. Eventually, there were snipers on rooftops shooting protesters and cops. Both sides blame the other. The reports in the Western media are to the effect of dictator Yanukovych shoots peaceful protesters. That justifies the regime change here at home. Yanukovych is hounded out of power right after that by right sector and Ukrainian Nazis that Nuland and McCain had been actively supporting with money and war material and weapons and the rest of it. Crimea was to be invaded at the same time by right sector from the north, coming down across the land bridge from the peninsula, and from the USS Donald Cook coming in from Bulgaria. Russia thwarts both of these things. Actually, Russia thwarts the USS Donald Cook, and it's actually a bunch of Russian Cossacks who come across the Kerch Strait by boat, cross Crimea and they're basically motorcycle gangs. I'm dead serious. Go watch Crimea: The Way Home. It's fantastic. These guys show up and defend the land bridge from Ukraine proper after the electricity and water trunk lines were cut by these guys. They cut off water and power to Crimea. And these guys showed up and defended the land bridge. Basically biker gangs and Cossacks. Dead serious. It's crazy. While the Russian military secured Sevastopol and Simferopol and sent the U.S. Donald Cook home running after it got painted with radar from a Bastion shore defense system, which shut it down. But clearly, we have the same kind of setup in play for Donald Trump at some point. Whether it's on July 4th or not is irrelevant. July 4th is just the next convenient potential escalation point. These incidents will continue to escalate. It will be used to storm D.C. if he wins the election, because you know that the election, regardless of what happens, neither side will accept the outcome, because the only way Biden wins this election is through clear voter fraud. Trump will not accept that through mail-in voting and ballot harvesting and all the rest of it. But Trump will not accept that. He's already made it abundantly clear we're not going to have mail-in voting if he has anything to say about it, period. Because he knows how ripe it is for corruption. They're not going to accept an election if he wins. He's not going to accept the election if he loses. This is most likely going to wind up in the Supreme Court. And so either the only two ways for this to happen, for Biden to win, is somehow it's another tie and the Supreme Court hands it to him a la Gore v. Bush, or there's just outright vote fraud and then Trump is going to question the results. He's going to challenge the results without any doubt in my mind. Neither side is going to allow the other one to win this election. If Trump is granted a second term, expect massive rioting and massive marches on D.C., at which point we will have another Maidan. There's no way we're not going to wind up with this situation. And then the question is going to be, how is that going to play? Donald Trump is already a dictator in these people's minds. They've already been prepping the narrative that he's a dictator. Every time he goes to lunch, that's another example of how he's a dictator. It's insane. The man tries to do his job as president, and it's just yet another example of abuse of power, and we should impeach him. It's insane and it's crazy, and nobody rational in America believes any of this stuff, but that is irrelevant at this point. The election is irrelevant in a sense. It's just going to be a catalyst for something much worse than what we've already seen. So to sum up, what's happening in Seattle with the CHAZ is a dry run for the next protest. You're going to see more of these autonomous zones try to spring up around the country. They will require direct political support. If they don't get it, they won't take. Trump has been right not to break things up because federalism still plays well with centrist voters. There's no reason to bring the military into a civil protest when when the argument can be made that the local government's the one that should be handling this, and that the police are willing to do their job, but they're being hamstrung by the local government, such as de Blasio and Durkin and the rest of them. Well, fine. Then the people in those states need to deal with it. We here in Florida don't want to pay for this and don't want to pay for suppressing the CHAZ in Seattle. That's Seattle's job. Don't they have a National Guard? Don't they have a state guard? Don't they have a way of dealing with this? So to most of us, let the crazies keep pushing the boundary until they lose all support. We got Sean King out there saying now it's time to deface images of white Jesus. Like, yeah, that's really going to play well with most Baptist blacks here in the South. Sean King really wants to reelect Trump. All he has to do is keep talking the way he's talking, because it's just going to ensure that every swing state where they're trying to court the black vote with all this stuff, it's going to fail. Sean King is a perfect example of people who live in such a bubble of their own IYIdom, intellectual yet idiot, that they have no idea what they're actually saying. The best way of putting it is they're so far up their own ass they can't see daylight. Trump's best defense against this is shoring up the domestic economy with new stimulus funds. I hate to say that as a libertarian, as an Austrian, as all those things. I hate to say it. But it's the strongest weapon. Because the first round of stimulus is going to start running out in the next couple of weeks. And mortgage delinquencies are going to go off the charts, and either they're going to go through the roof, and either Trump is going to need to do something to support the people against Wall Street who are going to be coming for their homes, or he's going to lose the election. That's where he's going to lose the election. He's going to lose the middle class. And all of this stuff with the CHAZ and Antifa and all the rest of it, that won't matter. Because bailing out Wall Street again is not a winning strategy. And of course, Wall Street is behind the CHAZ. Jamie Dimon told us he's behind the CHAZ. So that's what Trump's fighting. And then, of course, the Republican-controlled Senate wants to make we're still fiscal conservatives. Like, you've already printed $6 trillion. What's another trillion to hand out to the middle class? Oh, that's right. You don't want Trump reelected, Mitch McConnell. That's what needs to happen. The finale to this will not be up to Trump. In the end, it'll be up to the American people as to whether they believe this stuff, buy into any of this stuff or not. If a majority of the people in this country want President Trump overthrown and a restoration of the imperial class, then they're not going to vote for him. Because fomenting a coup and stealing the election are all they have here. Because each protest that gets broken up creates more radicals on both sides. It creates more Antifa, but it also creates more hardened normies ready to buy guns and shoot them. Again, I've been to a lot of gun stores in the last couple of weeks, and they all say the same thing. God, it's been crazy. It's been insane. It's a civil war, folks, and our neighborhoods are the front lines. And we have to decide whether or not we're going to push back against this at the block-to-block, street-to-street, community-to-community level. Because Donald Trump is not going to save the country here. We are. What he can do is to do what he's continuing to do. Attack the Southern District of New York. Attack the Ninth Circuit. Deny these states and these cities federal grant and loan money. Change tax policy to make it easier for the middle class to stay afloat during all of this. Refuse mail-in voting. And quietly, behind the scenes, round up the ringleaders of the protests. Set the legal precedents and get the legal structures in place necessary to start investigating this stuff and go for discovery and go after the people like Soros and Obama and the Clintons and the rest of them who are all behind all this. That's what needs to be done. And at the same time, make a deal with Wall Street and keep the military on his side. Because at some point, he's going to need people who are loyal to him in the military. And right now, that's not the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It's not people like Jim Mattis. So all those troops that he wants to bring home from overseas, those colonels are the ones that he needs to be courting. Because he tried cozying up to the generals, and it didn't work. Now, he's got to have troops. And he's got to have senior officers who are not political appointees, but actual soldiers on his side, if he's to remain commander-in-chief. This is the reality of what a civil war looks like. Spooks start the civil war, but the military will end it. Okay, this has been the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast, episode 40 for Tuesday, June 23rd, 2020. I hope you like what you heard today. I Sorry that it's so depressing, but it is what it is. Got to give you the straight dope, whether you like it or not. That's my job. If you liked it, give a like, give a subscribe, pass it out to your friends, do the whole 9 yards. You guys know what to do. We'll be back next week. Hopefully, by then, I will be able to get the guests that I've been trying to get on for the last couple of weeks onto the show. That would be great. If not, I may reach out to a couple of other people. We'll see. You guys take care. You be well. We'll talk soon. Keep your stick on the ice.